Hey friends, Dean here. Before we get you on to your episode, I want to take a moment to invite you to our next virtual online trivia night. Wednesday, May 13th at 8 p.m. Join us either on our Facebook group or on our YouTube page for 3 rounds of fun trivia, music questions, movie questions, general knowledge questions. It'll be a fun time and a chance to win some prizes and have just a good relaxing night of some trivia at home. You don't even have to go out for it. So don't forget, Wednesday, March 13th at 8 p.m. Join us on our Facebook group or YouTube for 3 rounds of fun virtual online trivia. We'll see you there. In this episode, we're visiting with a duo whose leader is one of the reasons that cheap guitars from the 60s are so expensive nowadays. That person is Jack White, the group is the White Stripes, and the album we're talking about is Get Behind Me, Satan. Stay with us.
Get ready for the 3324 podcast, where lifelong friends Dean Legiro and Erik Kuber share their love of all things music and movies. Dean has directed short films and is a music trivia buff, and Erik, trained in audio engineering, brings his extensive knowledge of music and film to the conversation as they discuss, debate, and celebrate their favorite albums, films, and much more.
Welcome to the 3324 podcast. If you're new, thanks for stopping by. There are literally millions of podcasts out there, and we are happy and grateful that you selected ours, right, Erik?
That's right.
Yes. So welcome one and all. Have a seat. Pull up some wood, bub, from our Breakfast Club episode. Grab some wood, bub, and sit down, because now that we've got you, we're not letting you go. So thanks for checking out the 3324 podcast. I'm Dean. Like I said, Erik is cross country somewhere in a bunker or in his living room.
In my living room. Here I am.
In the bunker.
Hi, guys. He's in the
I'm in like the Hobbit hole.
Stuck in the attic. With flowers in the attic. You're confined.
That's it.
There it is.
Well, it's more like Evil Dead. I'm chained in the basement, pushing on the floor to let me out.
Yeah.
That's close. I'm in the fruit cellar, the root cellar. So in this episode, we're talking about a really great album from a really great band, the White Stripes. So let's get into it. Let's give you the stats, aka the fun facts, and then we'll start talking about it. How's that sound?
That sounds great.
Cool. So this was released in July of 2005, produced by Jack White. All songs were written by Jack White. This had it hit number 3 on the U.S. charts. So that's a really good, strong performance for this album. There were 3 singles that came from this album: "Blue Orchid," "My Doorbell," and "The Denial Twist." It sold 850,000 copies upon release, and of course, probably sold more since then. The previous album to this was "Elephant," most notably known really for breaking out the White Stripes with Seven Nation Army. I mean, that when that video and that song hit MTV, it just like uncorked the White Stripes. They were kind of there and gaining momentum, but then when Seven Nation Army came out, it just blew up. And the White Stripes is a duo of Jack White and who plays guitar, and Meg White, who plays drums, and that's what they're known as, just a 2-piece combo of guitar and drums. And for the most part, up until this album, Get Behind Me, Satan, that's how they recorded.
Yeah.
Even though they were in the studio, they would not use other musicians, or Jack White would not really play other instruments for the most part. But Get Behind Me, Satan is a departure.
Yeah, the stuff before was very, very minimal. Very, it was almost like I think I heard an interview. I think they were on Charlie Rose, I think. And he said the approach was that Meg White, who plays the drums, was not a drummer. I mean, in fact, Jack White is the drummer. He started out as a drummer. But when he heard her sit down behind the drum kit and start to play, he really liked, not that she was fantastic at the drums, but it was almost like a child, the way he described it. It was like a child sitting behind a kit of drums, banging, and he really dug that feel, that kind of thing. It's almost like children in a studio playing, So I kind of like that. I didn't. That never really occurred to me before, But when he said it, it's like it makes sense, because she, and that became the thing. That was her thing. It was like, she's not known to be a great drummer per se. It's just.
But she is, though. So she gets a lot of flack for not being a good drummer. But you can't play this kind of music and be totally incompetent. So
Right.
I never got the backlash or the flack that she got.
Mm-hmm.
I think she's a fine drummer. There's absolutely nothing wrong with her. And for what they're doing, it's not drum fills. It's not Bonham. It's not gigantic drum kits. It's simple. That's what their
Very
aesthetic
simple.
is. It's very garage punk, whatever you want to call it.
It's very punk.
And got that garage band aesthetic, like you said, where he said when he had a drum kit and she sat down and he felt something, like when she started playing, like there was a connection there. So they were formed in 1997, and this is where the story gets a little weird because they were
talking about it otherwise if it weren't, you know.
Well, no, I could just be relaying facts, but this is where they got a little flack as well. When they first started out, they kind of promoted themselves as that they were brother and sister, right? Jack White and Meg White, and they're a brother and sister. And there was a specific reason they actually did that. But in reality, they were married. They got married in 1996. Jack White took her name. His real name is John Gillis. Mm-hmm. But when he married, he took her name, took her surname as Jack White. But the reason why they kind of did the whole brother and sister thing for so long is because they didn't want people focusing on if they were a couple and that kind of drama and the romantic aspect. You know, we talk about Fleetwood Mac and that whole drama type thing. And you could see why they would want to avoid it. And they figured, well, if we just say we're brother and sister, people will just leave that alone. And they'll just listen to the music at that point, which was the important thing. So it was a strange thing because then people started digging and finding out. And it turns out they were married. And then they would get divorced by, I think, 2000. They would be divorced. So that was a strange thing. And then the White Stripes themselves had a whole aesthetic and concept around them, from the fashion to the certain colors that they only ever used on album covers and in music videos. Is, you know, the whole red, white, and black thing. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. If you look at every album cover, that's all there is on those things. The number 3 figures a lot into a lot of what they do. Jack White has a record label, Third Man Records. I'm sure we'll get into a little bit of Jack White later, but yeah, just a duo out of Detroit, and so they kind of came up in that whole punky garage scene, blues influenced as well, and hit really big with Elephant and Seven Nation Army, and there's a couple other songs on there, Hardest Button to Button. They actually did a Burt Bacharach cover. I don't know what to do with myself. So they're a pretty eclectic
Dolly Parton,
duo.
Jolene.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I had never heard anything like them. I mean, they kind of, first couple of albums, I think they were kind of trying to maybe slightly recalling, there's some Zeppelin influence in there, but very simple. You know, again, that's that sparse instrumentation that they were doing. You know, that became like the first 3 albums were very, very similar in that regard. Elephant was more, I think it was probably getting more sort of blues tinged and just sort of what would become a lot on this album, you know, with the beats and and the rhythm.
Yep.
Really became a thing Elephant, with Elephant. Yeah.
Yeah. Was just a heavy, the White Stripes had a heavy, for a duo, they had a very heavy sound. And Jack White would do that, not with supplemental players, but with using pedals for his guitar. Yeah. And like octaver, where it would go down an octave, so it would sound like the lower notes would double as a bass note. So they were achieving things, but still keeping it as a duo, which is very interesting that they never strayed from that. You know, they never added or supplemented that way. And then once they get to their follow-up to Elephant, Get Behind Me, Satan, this is where I enter like the picture. The first single was Blue Orchid, and they were playing that video on MTV a lot. And it just really grabbed me, like the start-stop guitar style of the song. Yeah. And the start-stop style of vocals, like almost like a, kind of a staccato style vocal. And then just Meg White's raw drumming. I mean, it's got a lot of different things going on. And so that kind of grabbed me. I picked up the album then, a CD, whatever it was. And just, I was blown away. I loved it. Yeah.
It's one of those albums where you find yourself hitting the repeat button, or, you're just letting it play over and over and over again. Right. I mean, I think that's what you told me. I think I hadn't heard Get Behind Me, Satan, or had it, you had it first, and I think you actually persuaded me to get it. But I had known, like their previous work, But but this was, I wouldn't say a total departure, only because it's still very, very minimal. But but he's replacing guitar with piano, and there's some real weird sort of percussive instruments on this, which of course I love.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say expanding the sound, because usually when you talk about artists expanding their sound, violins or all this other stuff.
Yeah.
For the White Stripes, expanding the sound meant piano, bass,
playing a
mandolin,
instrument, right.
and marimba. If you're a duo, it doesn't take much to expand your sound. So adding the piano and the bass and some of just a mandolin, these other things. Yeah. Not a lot. It wasn't like strings and all this other crazy synthesizers, but that fundamentally on this album changed their sound. And, and it doesn't take much. It just took a piano basically and a bass to really open it up for Jack White.
It was slightly more exotic, perhaps a little bit more polished.
Definitely more piano based. I mean, this is as far as White Stripes go, this is the most experimental they would get, because their follow-up Icky Thump went right back to which was their last album, right back to the basics, right back to the original sound. Not that this was a mistake or anything like that, but they just kind of went right back to the basics. But this album is just, for the White Stripes, I don't want to say lush, it's richer, it's a little more fuller, it is. The songs have a little more behind them, and there's still like Blue Orchid is just really, it's for the most part, it's guitar and drums. Yeah, the piano figures really heavily into this. It's not keyboards, not synthesizers, but actual piano.
And interestingly enough, playing those really low notes on the piano too, as he would on the guitar. So everything is sort of bass. Everything is low end. I did hear some critique of this album saying that because they were doing other things, that the album felt incomplete for some people, for some critics. They were like, they're trying to starting to do more, and they just maintain that level of not doing more, and yet so the songs feel incomplete to them. Do you? Could you see that side of it? Do you agree with that?
I full-throatedly disagree with that.
Okay.
These don't sound like incomplete songs or demo-ish or half-finished thoughts. The songs are complete. There's actually some through lines in this album, so I'm not sure where they're going with that. There's two kind of concepts or through lines that this album follows. One of them, the main one, is just the concept of truth. If you go and you read the lyrics to these songs as you're listening to the album, there's a lot of discussion of truth, being true, not lying. That not lying doesn't necessarily mean you're being truthful about something just because you're not lying. And then the other part is Rita Hayworth, the actress from the 40s. She was kind of very beautiful, known for her looks and her beauty, known also for being married multiple times. But the thing that caught Jack White about Rita Hayworth is that she was actually of Latin descent, and had to totally change her name and become someone else and hide her truth. And there's that through line again. So she comes up by name in two different songs, and one, which is Take, really is kind of goes really after celebrity and the feeling of what that's like and how, from a fan's point of view, but it gets real creepy as well.
Yeah.
It's really
one of my favorite
weird
songs on the album too.
Yeah, no, it's a great song.
Yeah.
It's got the piano, it's got a great vocal, and it's got a great lyric to it. So if you do listen to this album, I would encourage you to pick up the lyrics as well, and you'll see that through line. And this is just a well spread out album as far as track order goes, because it doesn't have any dips where things get slow. I mean, it's really well alternated between some down tempo stuff and then picks right back up again. That's I think one of the things that keeps me engaged with this song is it keeps you almost off kilter. It doesn't get into a flow of some slow songs and then you stay with it, or some up tempo. It just keeps kind of alternating, vacillating.
And that's what you want. You want that kind of variety in
Yeah.
between. You know, you got two, maybe 4 or 5 songs in a row that are really fast, and then you got a succession of slow songs. It doesn't work that way. It feels more, you might think that that'd be more balanced, but it's not. Like let's say, like, first side will be like faster. The second side will be
Yeah.
like slower. I've seen artists do that,
Yeah. And I think
but
it depends. Yeah. I think it depends on what they're
on the
going
music,
for.
right? But in this case, you need this kind of, and there's a sort of I wouldn't exactly say eclectic nature to it, because the songs, I mean, they reflect that they're all sort of odd. They're all to have that classic White Stripes sound, I guess. But the way, just because he's again playing all these different instruments and stuff, it just feels different, and it's really not. So in a sense, there is, like you say, there's truth to it. The truth is that they really haven't changed all that much,
They're just going about it in a different way. They're
in a
just
different
using
way.
different tools.
Right. Exactly.
Let me ask you something. Since you asked me about, is this album a complete thought, or this critic said this or that? For some reason, from the beginning, when I heard this album, and let me know if it strikes you similarly.
Okay.
Not that it sounds like it, but I always equated this album for some reason to Go Insane by Lindsey Buckingham. I don't know why. Maybe because it's experimental for the White Stripes. It doesn't sound like Go Insane. I'm not trying to compare it. But for some reason, in my mind, it occupies that same kind of space where it's something different. Yeah. And the song, like you said, the songs are eclectic and they're different, and each one has some kind of twist to it.
I would have thought Tusk. This, the stuff that he was starting to do on Tusk. I did think about that. With Lindsey Buckingham does come to mind. They're kind of the same,
cut from the same cloth.
Same cloth, yeah. Experimentally, yeah. I think what Lindsey does with folk and pop, Jack White does, tremendously well with blues, and which I love.
Yeah, blues and folk. I mean, there's
blues,
some
folk, and punk. I mean, putting that punk in there is who would have thought you could do that?
Because Jack White is a very adept songwriter. I mean, he can write tender songs like I'm lonely, but ain't that lonely yet. As ugly as I seem. I love that. It's just acoustic guitar and bongos and just a vocal. And then he's able to uncork and let it rip with like Instinct Blues, and have fun with stuff like My Doorbell, which is one of my favorites too. Yeah. Which I love. And if you ever seen the music video for that, it's kind of like a Little Rascals video. Yeah. It has like the Hal Roach introduction with the two girls, and it's in black and white and like Little Rascally style dressed kids, like, from like the 30s. And it's a fun music video, and it makes it song even more fun. But that was one of my favorites.
He is definitely an old soul, Jack White. I mean, he talks about like vintage guitars, vintage artists. He's into, obviously, vintage actresses and, movies. And yet he brings such a modern sensibility to the music. It's again, unlike anything I've ever heard or at least at the time.
Yeah, well, I think he's got feet in both worlds, right? Because he when he goes heavy, I mean, it's just guitar, so it's not even supplemented by bass, and you're getting like a guitar assault in Instinct Blues,
and you're getting that really
and Red Rain,
that sharp buzz guitar. Like you think of people like James Iha from Smashing Pumpkins, and there's that sort of grunge garage band effect, whatever. But I don't know, with him, he's like, but then he'll throw in like a little slide thing or something, like, or this like weird sort of just one riff, or just like, like it just these bizarre guitar like moments too, like especially on this record. I mean, you do get some guitar here, but it's done in a more experimental fashion. It's just little riffs and little pieces, bits and pieces, little brush strokes, so to speak.
Yeah, which is interesting, because the guitar doesn't, on this album, the guitar doesn't have to lead the album. Exactly. He's able to use the piano, and then, like you said, use the guitar for the little flourishes or the little extra little bits on it that normally the guitar is just the whole thing, and he's trying to figure out how to get different sounds from it and accomplish what he wants.
I think that's what he has in common with Lindsey Buckingham, in a sense. And when you say Go Insane, that might be a better example of that. But I was going to say, get back to your question. I was going to say Tusk. You know, when he was starting to really get, you know, these little quirky songs and such on that album, you know, Stevie Nicks and Christine were doing their own, you know, still pretty much doing the same thing, and Lindsay coming off on this, like, don't even know where this stuff kind of came from, because you know, you never get an indication that he's even thinking about this kind of thing, and it just goes off the wall. And Jack White has definitely that appeal too, but in a much, I don't know, maybe he's louder, or he's just he knows how to get loud. He knows, well, just like the documentary implies, right? It might get loud. There you go.
Well, I think he's already in the arena for Lindsey. Not to go too far off on Lindsey Buckingham, but Lindsey Buckingham, it was a radical shift, and it was jarring for people.
Yes.
With Jack White, I think the sensibilities, or the in my mind, like the reminders or the echoes are there. Yeah. You know, so he's already bringing that brash style, that sense of experimentation, the loudness. He's bringing all that, but then he actually dials it down by bringing in more instruments, right? By bringing in the piano and bringing in the bass, it actually dials down the White Stripes and kind of grounds the songs a little bit more. I think it's just like Little Ghost, which is kind of folky and country sounding.
Yeah.
And then it goes right into Denial Twist, which is just another up-tempo song. It just kind of what's offered on this album. And like I said, in the way it's offered and the way the tracks are arranged, it just kind of, it keeps you interested and it keeps you listening.
It's no wonder that I'm not surprised that you got into this album like first, because I'm sure you must have heard, you know, obviously their older stuff, but again, there's that.
Not too much, honestly. Actually, Seven Nation Army, probably. And then We're Gonna Be Friends, which is a very like he wrote that, like which is, I knew it from Jack. I thought Jack Johnson wrote that song because it's on the Curious George soundtrack. So for me, I'd always heard We're Gonna Be Friends, this tender song about growing up. And really, it's just a beautiful song. It's just
very childlike.
Yeah, it's a great song. It calls back to when, I mean, he evokes a lot of feelings about what it was like to be young and a kid. I heard it from Jack Johnson and never thought anything of it. I'm like, this is what Jack Johnson would write. Mm-hmm. Jack White wrote that. You know, so I'm like, what? Like, this guy is very versatile. He can write those tender and vulnerable things, and then take out the guitar and just start cranking, crank.
Yeah,
which is really great. That's what I love about him. It's very easy to think that he's one note because it's a duo and there's not much to him. But no, if you listen to this album, you'll see that there's a lot more to Jack White.
Oh, absolutely. And of course, you know, he would definitely show off more of his prowess down the road. You know, where, you know, he is doing a lot of soloing, and then you do realize how you know, he's a great guitar player. It's almost like you feel like, well, he might be jack of all trades, so to speak, you know, master of none kind of thing, where they just kind of dabble and
did you just make a joke?
I think so.
Holy smoke!
Wow! Stop
the presses. Mark this date down. It's a day that will live in infamy.
Yeah.
And I got the joke too as well.
But you know what I'm saying, though. Like, it's just, it's like, you know, there's certain artists who know how to just, they give you only so much, but then, you know, they'll break into like Prince. Like, you know, you keep posting that video of While My Guitar Gently Weeps. I think you posted it a couple of times.
I did.
Where it was him and Tom Petty and Jeff Lynne, and he did that solo, and it blew everybody away because, you know, you don't really hear that from the guy on his records, right? Because he's much more experimental and such. So sometimes you don't really get a sense of just how great one instrument can be. And because of the earlier stuff, and it's more guitar oriented, you still don't get a sense of just how great he really is, Jack White. I think it's just very, very simple licks and that kind of thing. And it's just very, very sort of punk. But man, like his later stuff, like, you know, when he's on his own and when he's working with like the Rockin' Tours and that kind of stuff, it's just like he's, you know, it's a totally different sound and a different, you know, it's a departure from what he's been doing. So it's almost like he's like matured, but it's always been there. You know, he's always been sort of talented from the very beginning, but he chose to be this minimal for the White Stripes because that's what they are.
That's the aesthetic. Yeah.
That's the aesthetic.
So just to circle back on the video, if you want to see what Erik is talking about, well, you need to follow us on social media. This is the perfect time and the perfect slot to put this in because we didn't talk about it in the beginning. So check us out on Facebook and Instagram at 3324 Podcast. You can see the video that I post over and over ad nauseum, I guess, but or twice.
I wouldn't say over and over. It was twice. I think you posted it like just as yourself.
Yes,
and then
I probably did.
And then with our
I probably
cast.
did. So
yeah.
definitely check us out on social media, Facebook and Instagram. Like we're very active over there. You see, you get videos, you get a whole bunch of fun stuff there as well. So that's the mid-show plug for social media. So getting back to that, getting back to Jack White and getting back to Meg White as well. We can't shortchange her because this is a duo and she is the other part of it. And she provides she's not like Keith Moon, but she provides that random element, that element of randomness or uncontrollability, that she's not a seasoned drummer. She's not a trained drummer. She's a field drummer. Right. And I think we need to acknowledge that too, as well. This isn't just the Jack White show because she has to ground all that stuff. She's got to be there. And in this album, in Get Behind Me, Satan, there is some rhythmic through lines as well that she or the songs seem to follow. And most notably that I picked up on is like the double, like the one bass and then the drum hit and then two bass drum hits and then two snare drum hits. That kind of rhythm, and I'm not going to do it. You'll have to listen to it. If you listen to My Doorbell, that's the first appearance of this rhythm pattern that she does, and it happens throughout the album, sometimes without the double snare drum hit, but definitely the double kick drum and then the single kick and the single snare. And that's just another piece of this puzzle that they take you on, where Truth, Celebrity, Rita Hayworth, the rhythmic patterns, you're getting this whole thing in this one album, also with the White Stripes opening up their sound as well. So this is really a very compelling album. That's what got me into this. It was just so much to digest here.
Yeah.
And Meg sings lead on one song, Passive Manipulation. It's a short song, almost kind of like a placeholder, but it leads into, like you said, Take, which is a really great song. She
definitely provides she is the backbone. They're definitely, and then of course you see her in the live setting. I mean,
and she can play
over time. Yeah, I mean, it has to be. I mean, and there's nobody else there. It's like so. Yeah, I mean, it's not like I never really thought of her as a terrible drummer, but it's just it is very.
But she would get so much flack. I mean, you can't tour in a duo and not be able to play the drums. It would become painfully apparent there. And there's plenty of footage on YouTube. This what was it called? The Basement Sessions, I think, is a really great 20-minute video of a little set they did, and you can see her. I mean, she's it's not a goof and it's not a fake. It's not like, oh, there's she's playing to a backing track or something. It's just that she's not as polished as a professional drummer, right? We'll put it that way. She's not polished, but for this type of music, this garage style music, you don't want that.
No, you don't. It is very sort of.
You want that random element.
You want that simplicity. You want that sort of punk aspect to it, and that's what Jack wanted. I mean, he pretty much, because like I said, he could sit down behind the kit himself and play. Especially in the studio settings. And she brought something. Yeah, you're right. She brought something unique to it, and it wouldn't be like a lot of these bands. And you talk about bands and how unique they sound. Well, it's because of perhaps limitations that make the difference. Less is more. Definitely something to consider in rock and roll, especially in punk rock. So, and if you were to bring in a polished drummer, it wouldn't be the same. It just wouldn't. I mean, just like Jack White would probably want to be doing something different. But the fact that maybe because she's so limited, and well, that's what you're going to do. Here we're going to structure this around it, and that's the sound. And it's I mean, 5 albums in, and we're not too shabby for they're popular. I mean, it's not like they were like some underground band maybe at first, but they gained. They pretty much were very successful in a very short span of time too. So I mean, they were doing something right.
Yeah, no,
You got to consider that.
absolutely. And that kind of makes sense of using limited tools and then figuring out, well, how are we going to get the most out of this? And that was their MO for the first, four albums. This is the White Stripes aesthetic. So if you listen to this, if you only ever listen to this album as a result of this podcast, it's not all encompassing of what the White Stripes are. Actually, it doesn't really encompass what the White Stripes are at all, because if you listen to the album before and the album after is really what they are. This one is kind of in the middle, experimental, but not in the way that you think experimental music is, because these are all great songs and it's not weird. Are they quirky? Some of them, yes, absolutely. But that's what makes them endearing also. And yeah, it's just a different feel. And maybe that's what grabbed me, that it just wasn't the guitar and drum like Seven Nation Army. There's aspects of that in here.
Yeah.
But then it's filled out as well, which I kind of dug, and him delving into the piano and the mandolin, and like I said, like something like Little Ghost, which is kind of folky and Appalachian sounding and kind of weird, and that would kind of foretell him working with Loretta Lynn and producing her down the road. So there are some kind of markers on the road in this album, a fuller sound with the Rockin' Tours, right? And with the Dead Weather, which was he was in two other bands. and he played drums in the Dead Weather. So there are kind of maybe pulling him in that direction, as the White Stripes kind of started to wind down. But like I said, this one, if you take this one and Icky Thump, the one that came after it, I think that makes a really great 1-2 punch of doing the experimentation. But then very easily, they stripped all of that back away and just went back to the guitars and drums. There were some horns on one song, on a couple of songs, but removing the bass and the piano and everything, and having the discipline to kind of go back to it as well.
That's right. I find, getting back to that I was talking about before about the critique, it almost feels deceptive. I think they were expecting more from this album, because they started going to that, we're going to be, he's playing a lot more instruments. So perhaps they were thinking it is going to be a much fuller record. But again, there's the truth of it, right? There's the deception is the truth. We're sticking to this very minimal thing. And I think it just threw people off. Some critics even said it was lazy on their part. They were just being, they were very limited. They weren't up to their full potential and all this stuff. I'm just like, I don't get that. I don't get that at all. I think it's it's a brave record. I mean, it's going from that real harsh guitar to, just little dings on the piano and just one note on a piano, and those like low notes even.
Yeah, it must have been a head scratcher for younger people that were fans of like that hard sound, and
exactly,
and fans of like that alternative garagey punk sound that the White Stripes had cultivated, to then go to this, which doesn't sound anything like it. It doesn't have that feel to it. It must have been jarring, but what it did is it captured me as a quote unquote older listener. And not necessarily in the demographic of Elephant of Seven Nation Army, which was all over MTV, and was the young kids were digging it. And then they come out with this album, which is a more mature album, is really what it is.
Yeah.
It's a more mature thought. And then they're able to say, you know what, let's just kick it back. And for the next album, we go back to what we're doing. So, which again is really, like the contrast between Elephant, Get Behind Me, Satan, and Icky Thump is very interesting, because this is square in the middle, and there's no real indication in Elephant that this is coming, and there's no indication in Icky Thump that this happened.
You're right. Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. It kind of stands on its own, but it's the one that captivated me, just because of all this different stuff that was going on with it. And I'm like, wow, he's just, this was my introduction to the White Stripes. So for me, I kind of hit them. I caught them on the tail end. But if you're into the, it's not classic rock sounding, but it's got, Jack White has those qualities to him.
Yeah, he's very, like I said, he's very old school. He's got those sensibilities. He knows, he's very much into like people like Jimmy Page. And, I think he was, the more sort of experimental type of people in the beginning. So yeah, and then going back and then listening to the old blues artists of the day, and the ones that really kind of stretched
Yeah.
their abilities. Even they, a lot of those artists were very limited of their time, but were able to do so much with very little. And I think that's a lot of that. I think is inherent in Jack White. I think he kind of studied those kinds of people as well, and picked up a few things, and just
Yeah.
definitely the less is more aspect is
and you can't fake it when you're the only
No.
person on stage with the lead instrument.
Right.
You got to come correct, and that's
Mhm.
one of the things I love about them live is just he's just everything there. He's just doing it with one instrument at a time. Yeah, he's got pedals and he's got some things going on, but he's still getting it. He's still coaxing all of this out of one instrument.
And you got to be precise. I mean, you think that it would.
Yeah.
You think it's going to be. You listen to this stuff and you think it's easy. It's not. Just to get one note right, or to get that phrasing right, or just that rhythm right.
Yeah,
It's not that. It's not that easy. To keep that up. Playing a straight beat like that is very, very hard. Most drummers would be completely bored having to keep that up, and just sort of, and they'd want to be doing something else. But it's the restraint.
yeah, it's the aesthetic. I mean, there's no fill.
Right.
She doesn't play fills. She doesn't, right? There's no drum soloing like that. It's just pretty much she's grounding each song for him, so he's got that foundation that he can build on with his instrument.
Mm-hmm.
That's all there is to it, and she executes it well. Now, talking about his instruments, I mentioned it in the beginning in the intro as a. When did I start taking guitar lessons, Eric? I don't know, 83, 84?
80 was around there. Yeah, right.
Yeah, I haven't really progressed since then. I'm pretty much the same as I was then, but I like to buy older guitars. I used to buy them on eBay because they were pretty inexpensive and you can get something from the 60s. Well, Jack White comes along with Seven Nation Army, and people start seeing footage of him, and he's playing this airline guitar, which was a really cheap guitar. It was a El Cheapo. All of a sudden, every aspiring Jack White wanted to get their hands on an airline guitar, which was probably the cheapest thing ever, and it drove the vintage guitar market out of control. Because then other groups started playing these older guitars. I mean, Jimmy Page actually did it too he used to play a Dan Electro or a Silvertone. But it seems like Jack White really brought that to the forefront of getting these older cheap guitars and fixing them up or just using that raw tone, because they weren't great guitars, but that's part of Jack White's thing is he's getting these like raw different tones because the guitars weren't that great, but he's coaxing the sounds out of them. So for a ham and egger like me, who just wants to like strum a guitar and maybe get a cheap guitar from the 60s, it put me on the sidelines, Jack.
That's cool. I mean, it's
not cool. I can't buy guitars anymore. What do you mean that's cool? That's cool for Jack White. He's got all the money in the world. I'm like the guy, looking at eBay and saying,
"Oh, it's cool that you became." It's almost like a hobby, and it's not just about playing the guitar. It's collecting that kind of guitar, and there's a general interest. And what you see in, like, especially in that doc, It Might Get Loud, is the fact that he could actually build a guitar blows my mind, and he's so technically talented in that arena too. So he's able to fix either these guitars up, or when he made that, like, what was it, that took a stick, right? And he made
the wire
and a piece of wire, barbed wire, whatever, and he strung it up, and he started just playing that. That's awesome. I mean, that's just cool. He's not a big fan of the John Mayers out there, the Eric Claptons out there. He doesn't like, he's noted as saying, I hate those kind of guitar players who just play a Fender Strat or Telecaster, and it's because everybody plays those, right? Everybody had, in one variation or another. So he's really digs deep, and he's like, I think that's awesome. I think it's, but yeah, it sucks that, so maybe
the cheap
learn how
old
to build
people.
Your own. There you go.
I don't want to build. No, forget it. If I built my own, God, it'd be like that video on YouTube when the guy like plugs it in and electrocutes himself. It would be like it would be like the first and last time playing it. It's like, here, watch.
Well, for me, it's guitar. I wish that I had gotten into artists like this sooner, as younger, because that probably would have gotten me into guitar. Like just the craft of it,
Yeah.
and I've seen multiple videos, even like on PBS, and saying of how to when people make the guitar, and it's me. I've always been into drums, percussion has always been my area, so it was the exact same thing for me. I'm a frustrated drummer, never really went beyond. Over time, I don't really play a regular kit as half as much as I do like handheld percussion. So I tambourines galore. I got congas. I got bongos. I love like exotic like drums from like Africa and India and that kind of thing. I'm into that kind of stuff in a big way. And when artists use those on their records, I'm always listening for that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So like, but this album too, I mean, is the marimba, you got, like the piano, everything is percussive on this record. He's done it, he's actually accenting what Meg White is doing, so it's for me, this is probably my favorite record. I'm only for that alone, so because it's more percussive and, less guitar. And so,
yeah. And I think you don't realize it until you actually listen. Like when I started re-listening to this, because you take it for granted. You have the reputation of the White Stripes as, this guitar centric group. And especially when you hear the first song, Blue Orchid, it's White Stripes-y.
Yeah.
You almost get a false sense of assuming that's what, or thinking you're hearing it and you're not, but it goes right into piano heavy. You're right. Just into these different types of instruments. So favorite tracks, you have any?
I
or
do.
More than one?
Well, I love Blue Orchid. I love Instinct Blues, probably one of my favorites off the record. I just love that. I mean, it is.
That's like the dirtiest song.
It is.
As far as guitar and just.
Yeah.
I mean, it's about sex as well.
Yeah. Exactly. So yeah, it's.
So it's dirty in more ways than one.
Take. As Ugly as I Seem, probably my four favorite right there.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think the whole album's great, but for the most part, those are the standout tracks for me.
I think the ones I like, besides Blue Orchid, are very similar. Like I like My Doorbell and The Denial Twist, which both have a funky kind of piano to it.
Yeah.
They're very similar in that aspect. And Take, I really like, and you really have to listen to the lyrics of Take, because it's kind of it's a weird song literally about celebrity and about this person who sees Rita Hayworth in the song and is happy enough just to see her. But then it goes to the next level of, well, I want to get her autograph and I'm happy with that. It was all, the recurring theme is it was all that I needed. But it keeps escalating. And then once the autograph is attained, I need a photograph. That's all I need, and then a piece of hair. Well, that's all I need, and then it gets, So it's like this thing about like celebrity and obsession. And it's kind of it's a really great song, but it's kind of unsettling when you listen to the lyrics and the nature of how people could be and about obsessive fans and everything. So it's really interesting song. And then after it is a song As Ugly as I Seem. So it almost seems like it kind of goes hand in hand with that, which is a great song. And then I like Red Rain as well, which is kind of weird. That's kind of like they're kind of experimentally stuff, but that's where that rhythmic pattern that is established in My Doorbell, it resolves in Red Rain. You see it kind of help close out the album. And then I'm Lonely, But I Ain't That Lonely Yet, which is just Jack White at the piano, just a really a sincere vocal.
Yeah.
I really, like I said, he really is not, you think it's just one note because of heavy ripping guitar, but as he would prove after White Stripes, that there's more to him. Because while they were doing this album, the Raconteurs were kind of getting up and running, which was at this point would have been a side group to White Stripes. And they had their first, what was it called? Broken Toy Soldiers or Broken Boy Soldiers, something like that was their first album with Raconteurs. Steady As She Goes was that thing. But he took a kind of a passive spot in that group, like didn't want to, not really necessarily the lead singer all the time. He was kind of as a member proper. And then when he joined the Dead Weather, he wanted to be the drummer because he's like, I've already been guitar. I'm already guitarist in other bands. I do play the drums, so I'm going to be the drummer for this band, which is interesting too, right? Usually with ego,
you want to do everything yourself.
If you're in multiple bands, you want to be at the front. You want to be the front. You're Jack White. You
want to be in control, right?
Yeah,
I'm really surprised that he didn't just go straight into solo stuff. That would come much later.
Yeah.
Right. We're talking.
Yeah. Lazaretto would be his first. He would produce Van Leer Rose for Loretta Lynn, which was a comeback album. White Stripes have won multiple Grammys. So he's had a full career. And then what he's also been is he's been at the spearhead of the vinyl revolution.
Yeah.
As well with Third Man Records. He was reluctant. He established Third Man Records relatively early in his career, but didn't actually buy a studio till much later because his aesthetic was always just getting into a studio and recording with whatever they had. Mm-hmm. And he was into all that retro stuff, recording on tape. If that's what was in the studio, that's what he would use. But he finally set up a studio, and then he set up a label, and then started, is a big proponent of music on vinyl.
And bringing in artists, like new artists, like we talked about Lord Huron, and that having like all those artists are make believe, but here, Jack White's actually doing it. He's bringing in these like up and coming artists to appear on this label, and that's just great.
He's keeping that the spirit alive, and it has one foot in the past, but not as a disadvantage. Mm-hmm. It's not that's all he is, and he's this retro guy. He uses it to kind of propel the music forward and as an inspiration. And I don't even mean in the past, like he is influenced by 60s music, meaning he likes the technology. Yeah. So he's influenced by using these old consoles and mm-hmm. these older guitars and then having it recently, his new thing is having, this, I think it's called a triple jet, which is a guitar custom built for him, so he can do the things he wants, mm-hmm. And not have to switch instruments and go crazy all the time.
Yeah, there's a certain aesthetic to that old sound. I don't know. It's just, I don't know what it is exactly, but it's just, I think there are artists who maintain that, people like Dave Grohl, he's into using like the old Neve consoles and things like that in the studio. Derek Trucks is like that. They're, they record all their stuff, with an old console, getting that analog feel back in their bones, so to speak. But there's a certain, I think someone said it might have been Dave Grohl when he said that there's there's something about the old consoles that are just the craft of them, and they're not built quite the same anymore. They're just. Anybody can make a good sounding record on their computer nowadays. It's like it's not quite. Yeah. The process is not quite the same.
Those consoles were more like furniture.
Yeah.
Like built from the ground up and not, a bunch of electronics.
You bring it in, and there's so many knobs and things to play with on those things, the faders. And, I only got to use that twice, actually, when I went to school for it. Unfortunately, we had such a big class that I really didn't get the most out of it that I should have, because I only got, we had to rotate and, so we only had like 2 weeks for that particular class. So I only actually got to sit behind the board twice, but boy, it was fun. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And it's like, you don't see that kind of thing anymore. The technology has changed so much that, and I myself have never really caught myself up with it.
Yeah, it makes it more accessible, though. It makes people that could not afford studio time. Mm-hmm. The new technology allows you to do it at home and to mm-hmm. create. So it has, in some aspects, it's opened it up. But for the people that can afford it, they're able to rescue some of those consoles and and embrace that aesthetic,
rebuild them.
And he certainly has. And Jack White has been essentially the brainchild, but behind the White Stripes. So after Get Behind Me, Satan in 2007. They would release their last album, Icky Thump, which was a return to the what we'll call the classic White Stripes sound. It went to number 2 on the Billboard chart, so it did a little bit better. Was well received, but then in the middle of one of their tours, Meg White is always just a very shy person. You don't really see. She doesn't really grant interviews. She doesn't. She doesn't give interviews. She also has kind of battled anxiety. And when they went on their last tour, she didn't feel like she was prepared enough. At the end of one show, she said to Jack White, like, this is it. And he's like, oh, what do you mean after the tour? She goes, no, tonight was the last show. So that effectively ended them as a touring concern. They wouldn't officially break up until a few years later. They would put out, they had recorded a live album, which would come out, but that effectively did it for the White Stripes. No plans for them to reunite. Meg White is kind of gone and just is living her life. But Jack White has soldiered on either as a member of one of many groups, and as a solo artist as well, and as an actor.
Yeah.
Right. He famously was dating Renee Zellweger when he was when they were in that movie together. What was it? Ride with the Devil?
No, that's with Jewel. That's what with Jewel.
That was with Jewel. It was another Civil War.
Cold Mountain.
Yeah. There we go. Yep. So
with
he was
yeah.
Yeah. So dating.
And they were both great in it. She won an Oscar for that role. Renee Zellweger. I think she played Best Supporting Actress. I think she won the Oscar for that.
She did?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, but he was great in it too. And he was like very sort of like gentlemanly, like very quiet and shy in that. He was almost like Meg White in the film. Like he's acted like sort of like, timid. And so there's sort of a couple in the film eventually, but anyway.
Yeah. So Jack White, I think it's safe to say that he is a modern day, we can call him a modern day Renaissance man. He, from leading not one, or being a part of not one, but three groups, a solo concern, owner of a record label, also spearheading, bringing back vinyl, acting. So he does a lot. And this album, Get Behind Me, Satan, again, is different. But that's the thing that caught me, and I think it's what caught Erik as well, is just that different feel to it. And if you like the other stuff, the other kind of episodes we do about the classics from the 70s and the 60s, this fits well in that canon. For the 2000s, for when this came out, you really weren't finding music like this anywhere and as well thought out as Get Behind Me, Satan, and that's what grabbed me.
This is what you want. You want something that is reminiscent of the sensibilities of the past and somebody embracing that, but taking it and making something new.
Picking up, I always felt that Jack White kind of picked up the torch.
Absolutely, yeah.
For kind of those auteurs and those musical artists that were in the frame of a do-it-yourself kind of person, right? Of a Lindsey Buckingham or one of those other ones that has the vision in their head or knows what they want, and then just kind of is able to execute it and make it their own. There's nothing that sounds like him, so it's not like he sounds like Aerosmith or anything else. It is purely White Stripes and is purely Jack White. So that's going to do it for this episode. We appreciate you checking us out. As always, we thank you. You can find us on social media at 3324 Podcast. That is good for both Facebook and Instagram. Very vibrant social media presence we have on there. We also do live shows, which you don't get to check out here. You have to go there to check it out. So for Erik, this has been Dean, and we will see you on the flip side.
You've been listening to the 3324 Podcast with Dean Legiro and Erik Kuber. You can find us on your favorite podcast provider, so please like, subscribe, and rate to become a part of the 3324 family. Your feedback is important, so make sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at 3324 Podcast and on Twitter at 3324P to join the conversation.